Today's discussion topic is getting new ideas, and that's kind of like the deal, so to say, when it comes to research, right? Like you sort of, I mean, that's what it is all about. Like you sort of have to uh, get to the new ideas as quickly as possible and develop over those new ideas as quickly as possible, right? And to test those new ideas and to figure out whether the ideas are working or not, right? So that's the journey, sort of. So today we are going to talk about the starting or the beginning of that journey, which is how to initiate those ideas, those new ideas, and what can be really, really solid and cool, interesting ideas while you are doing literature survey, right? So again, to give you a context, as researchers, we are constantly fighting against volume, time, and memory. That's quite evident. And I will again want to bring your attention to this one statistics, which is that roughly 70% of the researchers are able to read only one paper a week in their entire to-do list. So imagine that the amount of papers that keeps getting piled up and you never end up reading them, although you are piling them up in your to-do list. So that's a huge problem, right? And that's the enormous amount of research opportunity that you're losing out on, right? And much of the problem is time. So this is where the time problem comes in. Again, I'm going to bore you to death probably, but with this particular slide, but it's very important. Like every good paper is an immense research opportunity, and I cannot stress this more than enough. So just bear with me. But today, what we are going to talk about is how to quickly identify the research gaps, how to get to those gaps very quickly, right? So that's going to be today's discussion topic. But here you go. You have all these references that you keep collecting and you keep putting into your reading list, your to-do list, stuff's coming from your professor, stuffs that you find while reading papers, all the inline citations and so on and so forth. And it proliferates like anything. It just keeps expanding like anything, and floods your folder. Now, the problem is that the more you're reading, the more you're forgetting. And also, it becomes very overwhelming for all of us. It's not just you and me, it's for a lot of us, a majority of us. It becomes very difficult for us to figure out what are the gaps that we are able to find in the current paper that we are reading, like the paper that I'm currently reading right now, versus what were the gaps that I found out maybe in a paper that I read 2 months ago, or in a paper that I read 5 months ago, and how these two gaps connect with each other, or how one thing connects with the other thing, and whether there is an opportunity that I can see while I'm trying to connect one particular research paper or whatever I'm reading now with what I've already read before, right? And while I'm doing those comparing and contrasting and how that comes up, right? So I don't know whether you are able to see this cartoon. This is from PhD Comics. I'm a huge fan of PhD Comics. I think by now you have understood it. So this is one of those typical academic rejection letters that you see, when you submit a paper in a journal and you get a rejection. And one of those comments that people would make you feel so bad. It's like, it's not original enough. Okay, so they would say, like in this particular comic, it's like, although the reviews are not entirely negative, which in this case, what they really mean, the reviewers, are that they are pretty bad. And it is evident that the manuscript does not meet our criteria for novelty and impact, which actually what they mean is your topic isn't trendy enough. So you see, there's a kind of like this paradoxical thing that on one hand, they talk about the novelty and the impact, and the other hand, they talk about being trendy. So it's kind of very, very interesting to feel to understand this part, that on one hand you need novelty, which is original. Your work has to be original. Your ideas has to be original, and your approach has to be original. But on the other hand, it has to have an impact, which means if it is not impactful research, your idea can be rejected or your paper can be rejected. So that's kind of like the balance. That's kind of like a dichotomy sort of, in which you have to deal. And every researcher, especially in the academic scenario, every researcher has to deal with this, right? So, but then something beside the point is that the more papers you're reading and more relevant those papers are, I call it the curse of relevance. Because what happens is that you're finding a relevant paper, you're finding a new paper, it's relevant, and the more relevant paper you find, you're happy about it. But then what happens sometimes, that you then suddenly figure out that, hey, you know what, they're pretty much talking about the same thing which I had. So which means that their idea is pretty much resembling what my idea is about, and if you suddenly feel like, hey, wait a minute, what's happening really, am I really getting new ideas, or whatever new idea I'm coming up with, it's done, it's almost there, out there. So how to deal with this situation, right? So that is kind of what I call as the curse of relevance, right? So by the way, if you have any questions in between, just keep letting me know, so that, yeah. Okay, so today, to pinpoint this issue, which is gap identification, quickly finding the gaps. So there are three things that I'm going to discuss today, okay? The first thing is examining the research questions, which you would be reading during a literature review, right? And there are two aspects to it that, subdivisions, sort of, that we have to be very careful about when we are reading a good paper. One is the research goal itself. Like when you're reading a paper, the paper has some research goals or research objectives or research question, and that the paper is addressing. And the paper is addressing those goals or describing those goals in a particular way. Usually they use some sort of discipline specific formalization. And then what is very important to understand is how is this formulation evolving over time. And I'm going to talk about this evolution part in more details and why this is so important while you do literature survey. The second thing is the second point is the assumptions, which means the assumptions that the authors are making, uh, which sets the tone of the research goal, or which sets the scope of the research goal. Like whenever somebody wants to solve something, or whenever somebody wants to address a particular research question, usually researchers take some assumptions, or limit their work or limit their investigation, using some assumptions. So that study and critically analyzing those assumptions are also very important, because these are the two starting points where you can very, very quickly identify research gaps. Okay, so we are going to talk about these two things in more details. I'm going to tell you a trick, how to actually do that. So the second aspect is coming up with new points to ponder, sort of, which is essentially your starting point. Those are your starting points, like your building blocks for your own contribution, for your own new ideas, right? So essentially coming up with the new points to ponder real quick. And then finally, maintaining a working note of whatever gaps you're finding. Okay, so whatever gaps you're finding, you need to maintain a constant working note, right? So again, this is something that everybody has to, in some sense or the other, has to deal with, and we all go through this thing, right? So you read a paper and then suddenly you feel like, well, somebody already did it. And what I'm going to teach you today, or rather what I'm going to discuss or give you this trick, is how to make sure that you reduce the possibility or probability of going through this situation which is there in this content, right? So here we go. The very first thing you need to look critically is the rigority of the problem formulation. And what are the steps? So imagine that you set aside for yourself 10 different papers, right? So you have decided, okay, I'm going to read these 10 papers in this week, in this upcoming week. So starting from Monday to let's say Friday. I don't know how many people work on Saturdays, but let's say Monday to Friday. Let's just take it. The upcoming Monday to Friday, you decide that there are like 10 papers that you want to read, go through, and you have selected that down, narrowed it down, right? So the step 0 that I'm it's kind of like the trick that I'm telling, it's very interesting, very different than probably what you have already done so far. So you straight away get to the area of the paper, that section of the paper, that page of the paper where the problem has been defined or the problem has been described in details, right? Just go to that section. But then don't read it. Don't read it. Just go to that section. Okay, just mark it with a pointer or a highlighter or something. Just mark that. Don't read that, right? Don't read. Resist the temptation of reading the results. Resist the temptation of reading the approach. I know this is very counterintuitive. Don't go and look into the results or the findings of the paper. Don't go and look into the approach or the technique or the algorithm or whatever that has been, or protocol. Don't go, or the methodology. Don't go. Don't read that. Just go to that section of the paper which only and only talks about the problem, describes the problem in detail, crisply, right? And don't read it also. Just go till there and stop, right? This is where actually your research opportunity starts. Many people miss this opportunity. Most people actually miss this opportunity. So what I'm going to tell you is something interesting. What do? Don't read it. Jot down all the aspects of the problem or the research question that you think needs to be taken care of or needs to be solved in order to completely solve the entire research question or the research problem in its entirety, end to end, right? Which means, imagine that you are to solve this problem, break that problem into sub problems, or what are all the different things that you have to take care of if you have to solve this grand problem, the problem in its grandest sense, right? I'm not telling you to do that, but I'm saying what happens. Just imagine that. Just create that canvas. So start drawing that canvas, that entire big scope, kind of. And that can very well become your thesis, your entire PhD thesis scope. So let's draw that bigger canvas first. Let's create the boundary and figure out what are the different aspects of sub-problems or different dimensions of the problems that you think has to be solved. It doesn't matter whether you would actually solve those problems or not in your PhD. Just jot them down, right? That you think needs to be solved. That's step number 1. So what do? You take a paper, you go to that section, don't read that section, jot down all those things. Then what do? You start reading the section where the problem has been described or detailed out. Okay, just the problem. It's only the description of the problem. What is to be solved? Only that part. Now, what you need to do over here, note down how many of those list that you created in step number 1, all the different aspects of the problem, the different dimensions, the different sub problems that you listed out. Note that how many of that is actually matching in terms of what the authors also identified, the authors of the paper that you're reading. Okay, and how many you have missed out. So do that checkbox list. So how many did you identify versus how many did the authors identify, and try to do this matching. Like, okay, so I identified 10 different sub-problems, and these authors identified 5 different sub-problems, right? And then you see what were those things that the authors identified that you couldn't identify, right? And note that down, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that the other one, do the other thing. What were the things that you identified which the authors did not identify, and mark them down as well, right? So what happens over here is, this is the starting point where you begin to develop the skill of having your own key insights, having your own insight into the problem. You start developing a deeper sense, a deeper understanding of the problem that you want to solve first, right? And what you need to do over here is you need to think and discuss whether what you missed, which the authors did not miss, whether that really matters or not, which means this is something extremely crucial over here. You simply should not buy in the fact that just because the authors think that these are the things that has to be solved, or these are the things which are important for this problem, it's important. You should question it. You should critically examine it. You should be convinced about it. And much of that convincement process is not just about you doing it and you reading it. You should do it with your teammate, with your lab mate, with other students who are doing work related to what you're doing, with your supervisor. And this is extremely important because this is where, you might suddenly see that, hey, you know what? The stuffs that the authors are, are mentioning, which you have not mentioned, which you did not think are to be important, are actually not really important. So that can very well happen that, what the authors are trying to, address are not really that significant. They don't make much sense in terms of solving the greater problem. The other thing can also happen, which means uh, whatever the authors missed, which you did not miss, whether that really matters or not. So you need to question yourself also. Like if you have found out certain new things which the authors did not find, then whether those new things, let's say out of those 10 things, there are 3 things that you found out and you saw that the authors did not address those 3 things or did not even talk about those 3 things, then resist the temptation of believing that you have found the research gap. Think hard whether those 3 things really matter or not. And you have to discuss this with your supervisor and with your lab mates, right? So that's the first thing. What you do is do the same thing for the next papers, because what did we assume? You have like 10 papers to read in the upcoming week. Then go to the next paper, the second paper, do the same thing as what I said, these 3 steps. Step 0, step 1, step 2. Then go to the third paper, go to the fourth paper, go to the fifth paper. Go through all the 10 papers without reading anything else, but only doing this. What happens while you do this is you are going to get a comprehensive list of all the aspects that you have missed and that the authors, all those 10 authors or all the authors of those 10 papers have missed out on. And you are now critically going deep into those things which each one of you missed, both the sides missed, and then trying to figure out whether that really matters or not. And that is a great starting point for figuring out whether you actually have hit a treasure or not. I'm going to show you, don't worry, I'm going to show you how you can do this thing in a beautiful way inside Rax, right? But before I show that, let me go to the second aspect of this entire thing. And by the way, if you have any questions, maybe I can just take some questions in between over here. If you have, so what Vidyasagar, okay, from Pimpri, Vidyasagar says, let me see, how to jot down all the aspects of the problem that I think need to be taken care of. One has to completely solve the problem. Please, are any examples for it? Yeah, so this is where I'm going to show you how to do this thing with the server. Okay, don't worry about it. It is so difficult to develop insights which I get help. Okay, so let me quickly go into this into an example and show you how to do that, and then maybe I can go to the next topic and then again show you how to do that. So let me just pull up um, Rax. So for those people who don't know where, how to find Rax, so it's the website is Raxter.io. You just get over here, and it's a very simple login process, sign up process. It's extremely simple, sort of, and you just select over there, and then I'll just give you one example of my own research project that I'm currently working on inside Rax, and I'm going to show you how you can do that in Rax. You can follow those 3 steps. So imagine these are the papers. Let's say some of these papers I have decided to read in the upcoming week. Let's say this paper, and this paper. Let's say these are the 3 different papers that I have decided to read, just for the example's sake, that I have decided to read in the upcoming week. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first select the first paper. I'm going to open it. So when I open the first paper in Rax, it opens up the first paper. And what happens is that, okay. So this is the paper. So by the way, this research project, this is a particular research project, and this I can create multiple different such research projects inside Rax. So I'm going to just focus on one particular research project. And in that research project, what I'm doing is I'm reading this paper, right? So this is one of those papers which is related to abstractive summarization, right? And as I'm reading this paper, what happens is that, let's say I'm reading the abstract of the paper, or let's say I go to that particular section of the paper which specifically talks about the problem statement. Okay. Okay. And let's say that, let's say, okay, so this is the, let's say, the problem statement. In this work, we study pre-training objectives specifically for abstractive text summarization evaluation. So this is, let's say this is the section. Okay, this is the section that, oops, sorry, I'm not very good with my mouse. So let's say this is the section. So the moment you are reading this section, you can highlight this section saying that, okay, for now, this is what I'm going to read. This is all I'm going to read. And you might also want to look into other places where the main research goal, right, has been discussed. So you can look into all these places and you can keep highlighting that, right? So wherever you you find that these are the places where the research goal has been described in details, you just highlight them, and that's what you should focus on, right? Then what do? Don't read it, just highlight it. Then what do? You can then create your own draft list, right? So there, over here, for every project, you have the paper list, and then you have the draft list, as you can see. And in the draft list, you can create multiple source of drafts, and these drafts are your working notes. Okay. So what are working notes? So working notes are notes that would help you to figure out, to maintain a record of all the different gaps and aspects that you are finding out. As an example, I'll show you one example. Let's say I create a working note called gaps in research approach. So what I do, I just click on this, I open it up in a new tab. And this is one working note that I would be starting on, which only talks about the gaps in my research. Sorry, I opened the wrong one. So gaps in my research problem formulation. So let's say that's the one. Okay. So let's say this is only for those gaps that I find from the research problem formulation part, right? Okay. After creating this, now what I can do is, one thing can be problematic, right? Because your research goals can be described at multiple different places, and you may have to just go through the entire paper to figure out where all the research goal or the research questions has been described, right? So one thing that you can do instead of doing that, you can use this new feature that we came up with, which is called Key Insights. And what happens in Key Insights is you can click on Key Insights and it generates the research goals by reading the entire paper for you on your behalf. And it brings and collates all the research goals together in one place, as you can see over here, right? So that's an interesting part of Key Insights. That's the AI part. So it actually brings together all the different research goals in one place. Now comes the deal. What are the dimensions or what are the aspects of a problem? So if you look at it carefully, you'll see that many times there are different things that that happens in a research paper. One is that the author takes up a problem that is already there, that has already been studied, but the solution is not yet fully developed. And the author takes that problem as it is and then works on that problem, right? What you need to question in that case is, are you convinced even that that is an important thing to be solved? In the sense that if you solve that problem, imagine that you solve that problem. Imagine that problem is solved. What effect does that solution have in the greater scenario of the bigger problem to be solved? Does it really make sense in the sense of if you solve that smaller one single specific problem in the greater scenario of where the specific problem will be applied, maybe in some application, or maybe it fits into a bigger problem which has to be solved? Does that really create a significant value if this particular problem has been solved? Is it like, or is it just a minute little thing? It doesn't really even add up to any value when it comes to solving the bigger problem, when it comes to solving the bigger picture. Or it may also happen that that problem is already solved. People are still, robbing it for some little, small little increments, but the problem is technically solved. And people, in reality, people are not even bothered about it anymore. Only a few people are bothered about it, and for not the right reasons. So that is what we call as figuring out whether whatever you're reading, these research goals, whether that really makes sense for you, whether you should be even pursuing that research goal, right? One way to do it is to look for, let's say that I can select this entire section, and the moment I select this intersection, this context pop-up comes in. And the moment it happens, I can explore more research papers that are related to this particular section, which means that are related to this research goal. So I can look for research articles that are related to what is the key research goal of this particular problem. And then what I can do is I can figure out, okay, let me see how many people in recent times, right, have, let's say 2017 till 2020, how many people in recent time is interested in this thing? Is it even something that is interesting to the community as a whole in recent time? So what I can do, I can fine tune, I can fine tune, I can put the date range after doing that. And I can see whether there are papers that are related to this particular thing which I selected, right? So it is specifically meant for those papers which are talking specifically about this, which are actually trying to solve this particular problem. Got it? So that's another way in Rax where you can figure out what are all the different things that are happening around this particular problem, whether it is even interesting to the community. That's another way of validating. If you find that these are interesting and you want to read these things, you can attach it with that section. And the moment you attach it with that section, all these papers starts getting attached, right? Something like this. Now you have a very good reference point to come back to those papers and then to dig deeper into those papers to figure out whether there is any much new things that are coming out of it or not. Because now you have a very nice basis of comparison specifically on this particular problem, specifically on this particular aspect. That's one aspect. The other thing is that it might very well happen that some authors, what they do is they take a problem which has already been established and they come out with a derivation of that problem, which means a complementary aspect of the problem. As an example, I give you a very lame example. Let's say that somebody at some point of time, the architecture of Taj Mahal was very important research topic. But then it has been so oversaturated in terms of a lot of people have already worked on the architecture on Taj Mahal. And then what somebody does, he takes that problem and he gives it a twist. And he's like, okay, I'm going to talk about the history of the architecture of Taj Mahal. So not the architecture of Taj Mahal from in the perspective of how an architecture student would look at it, but rather in the perspective of how a historian would look at it. Architecture historian would look at it. And maybe it is very well possible that not too many work has been done in that area. And that area is important to be explored. So it can very well be possible that I am looking into the history of the architecture. Somebody might think that, well, you know what? I am more interested in looking into what are all the other monuments that resemble the Taj Mahal. And I'm going to talk about the architecture of those, monuments that have stylistically that are very similar to Taj Mahal. And I'm going to research on them, right? Some people might start believing, some historians might start believing that, hey, there can be a basis on which Shah Jahan was inspired by that kind of a concept. And where did Shah Jahan get that inspiration? Was it Iran? Was it Turkey? Was it Central Asia, Samarkand? Where did he get those ideas? And maybe may start digging deeper into what was the inspiration of Taj Mahal. So you see that the same problem have multiple dimensions. And you can explore any one of these dimensions depending upon how much work has been already done over there, and also depending upon how important is it. Does it even make sense to explore that topic, right? In terms of the significance of a greater goal that you want to achieve for your thesis, for your bigger thesis, right? In terms of the impact that you want to bring into the community for the bigger thesis, right? So one, like as an example, I give you another example. Let's say Mirza Ghalib. There has so much of research on Mirza Ghalib, but you might come up with an idea saying that, hey, I want to study what was Mirza Ghalib's perception about the 1857 revolt. What was his own take or his own perception or opinions about the 1857 revolt, right? Sepoy mutiny, because he lived in that time. So you might want to figure that out, who knows? And you might want to come up with some interesting things, So what I'm trying to say is an already existing problem can be twisted and redesigned and reformulated in very interesting ways. And that can be a research opportunity on itself by its own, right? So that is what I mean by exploring different aspects. Vidyasagar, I would love to know from you if this helped or if I confused you even more. I'm just waiting a little bit for Vidyasagar. Any questions in between, please feel free, otherwise I'll continue. Don't worry, I don't have too many slides, so I'll wrap it up. Okay, great. If you need more help, we can always go offline. You can email me with the sugar, and probably I might want to, I will be able to elaborate on this more, right? So now coming to the second thing, okay? Oh, by the way, discussion. I forgot that part. Another aspect is, if you think that, oh, wow, I have to read the paper a lot and then figure out, you can also do the same thing by going to key insights, selecting that particular section. Sorry about my mouse. My mouse is actually bothering me a lot. It's not my mouse. And you can select papers on that specific aspect, on that specific research goal. And again, you can get these papers, and again, you can go and fine tune in terms of the year and apply the year and figure out how many people are actually interested in this thing, right? So you can do all those things. You can also select the next aspect of the paper. So these are all the different aspects of the research goal itself, and it has been nicely collated for you by the AI engine. And you can again look into other papers which are related, right? Okay, so now coming back to the point. The third way of doing it is by forming a team. And what you can do, you can click on the share button over here. Over here, as you can see, you have a share button. And you can select your supervisor, your teammate, you can email them. Something like this. And you can write a note for your collaborators. And once they are in, you can then you can see them as your members. And once you are your members, and you can actually now look into the activities, and you can clearly start a discussion thread over that section itself. So what you can do is, I show you with an example. So you can actually look into this entire section, and you can start a discussion thread, as you can see over here. So this is your personal notes, which other people won't be able to see, but this is the discussion thread. So you can click on it, and you can start a discussion thread by mentioning somebody and say that, people, I need help on this, or maybe what's your take, and so on. And whenever Ketu gets the time, he can start commenting on it, and so on and so forth, right? So, and you can actually see the discussion thread, and it can be like a thread, like a nested thread, right? Or what you can do is, you can also put it on as a critique template, and you can have, okay, all right, so you talk about the problem, and these are all questions related to the problem, right? Which is auto-filled for you, but you can also customize these questions according to your own needs. And you can say that, okay, what are the premises or assumptions made? What's the context or background? Any logical fallacy or inconsistency in the arguments? And you can actually start a discussion thread with your supervisor remotely, or with your lab mates, or with your friend who is working on the same or related area. And you can start discussing all these questions which are related to the research problem itself, right? So that's the discussion group, the group discussion that you can start doing over here. You can start a thread like this on the critique that you're writing, or and you can also again start a discussion thread on the critique. So you can start a discussion thread on the critique, or you can start a discussion thread on the paper itself. Both ways, right? All right. So now coming to the next part, which is assumptions. Now you need to be carefully understand the rigority of the assumptions. So the step one over here is, you need to note down all the assumptions made in the paper. Just identify and note them down. Again, working notes, again, drafts. You can make a draft, and you can keep, as you keep reading one paper at a time, just jot down all the assumptions. Then start asking yourself this question: when do these assumptions hold true? And when do these assumptions fall flat, which means they don't hold true? How often do the assumptions hold true? Is it like on a very rare, blue moon day, you find that these assumptions are actually holding true, then simply there is a gap. That's a huge gap for you, and you can actually start figuring out, or kind of like a rebuttal or a refutation paper, and you can actually start doing your research around that, saying that this is not an assumption that can actually possibly, be the foundation of this research. We need to take this assumption out, and we need to look into this problem in a whole new way without this assumption. So that leads you to this third question. Can you tackle this research problem, or can you tackle that research question if you take some of those assumptions out? What happens? What happens to the nature of that particular problem, to that characteristic of that particular problem, or to the intrinsic property of that particular research question? The moment you start taking out some of those assumptions. That, okay, I'm not going to take these assumptions. Now, without taking these assumptions, if I have to solve this problem, how difficult is this problem becoming? And the moment you take assumptions out, that is a derivation of the problem. That is a particular case of the problem. And you are now coming up with a new version of the problem. And that can be a whole new opportunity for you. So a lot of times I've seen people making this, especially students making this mistake. They don't think too much on the assumptions. But then the assumptions are great opportunities in terms of figuring out what can be new directions. After doing that, then do step number 2, which is you now need to narrow down to how the assumptions have been described, or how the assumptions have been formulated in each one of those problems. Those 10 papers that you have set aside for yourself, in the upcoming week. So look into each one of those papers, look into those assumptions, figure out how they have been described. So ask yourself these questions. Have they been crisply, if it is more of a STEM kind of a paper, then there has to be some mathematical formulation, or if it is some humanities or social science kind of a paper, then it has to be some sort of discipline-specific formalization. So try to understand whether the assumptions have been crisply described, or is it just like fuzzy, just fuzzy, just superfluous. If not, if they are fuzzy, then can you bullet down all those assumptions which are fuzzy? And then try to figure out whether you can make them concrete. And once you start making those assumptions concrete, are you finding that you are coming up with this new dimension of the problem? And it happens a lot. The moment you start making those assumptions crisp and detailed, you find the problem itself is taking a whole new color, a whole new dimension. And that itself can be a big opportunity, right? So what you need to do over here in Rax is just do the same thing, but this time, instead of let's say you go to key insights, so instead of the research goal, you go to the presumptions in the paper, right? Or and look over here and try to figure out what's going on. You can start a discussion thread on this, or you can go to the paper itself and look into the assumptions, mark those assumptions, and then try to comment, and then comment. Let's say this is a particular section of the assumption, and you can comment on this section, and you can start a discussion thread with your teammates on that assumption itself, right? Or you can go to the critique template, and there are questions on the assumptions, and you can start creating your own questions on the assumptions and fill that up and discuss that with your friends, or with your lab mates, or with your supervisor, right? So, and the beautiful thing about this is that you don't really have to write an entire essay or a story or a novel over here. You just put some bullet points and you just start discussing. That's the point of critique template, okay? So, or as I said, you can keep on jotting down your ideas or your gaps that you're figuring out, and put it into this one single draft called gaps in research problem formulation, and just keep putting your stuffs over there. And while you're putting your stuffs over there, if you want to search more stuffs, you always have this thing. You always have all these stuffs like research papers and all those things. You can always explore more research papers while you're jotting that down, right? Now comes the final part. By the way, any questions so far? Yes, so the question is very interesting. Can we able to connect our own arguments with the help of the arguments in past literatures? Uh, there is one thing that you can do so far. We are coming up with this, where you can actually connect your own ideas with other people's ideas. But so what we have done over here so far is, and this is one of the wonderful, stuffs about Rax is, okay. So you can, let's say, look into a particular paper, and what you can do is you can select a certain section of the paper, and then there is something called compare from your collection. Okay, that's one of those amazing features. What you do is you kind of like backlink. So when you compare from your collection, what happens is Rax looks into the main key idea. Let's say this is a research question, or let's say this is a research argument, or sorry, assumptions. So you can then click on compare from your collection. And if there is any paper in your entire collection which you have already done in a to-do list, or you read some 2 months ago, 5 months ago, 1 year ago, those papers are going to come in together with that particular section, which is related argument in an argument sense to this particular section. And if you think, you can pin it. The moment you pin it, you can start putting some remarks saying that this is the similarity, this is how they are similar, blah, 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 this is how they are dissimilar, blah, blah, blah. And this is my gaps identified. And you can put these notes over here, and it stays over here. Later on, you come back to this paper, and you have that particular thing together with the, oops, maybe it didn't get saved, but yeah. So you can come back to the thing, and you can put some notes over here. Yeah. Right. So that's sort of a way, the question that you had with this other. That's sort of a way in which you can connect what you're reading right now with what you have already read before, long time back, and how the two research questions are connected to each other, and you can quickly compare and contrast them, or how the two assumptions, in two different papers, or it's not just two different papers, because as you can see, you have multiple papers that you can connect. So I give you another example where you can actually connect it with multiple different papers coming from not just this project, but if there are other papers in other projects, that will also come up. And you can, and with that particular section, not just the paper, but the section which actually relates to this section. And you can immediately read it over here, and you can pinpoint it if you think that's interesting. And you can pin multiple things, like this, right? So that's another very interesting way. Thanks for actually pointing me out this question with us, Sagar. So you can actually do that. Okay. One final thing before we conclude today is that evolution. I talked about evolution, right? So over here, what I said was that we are going to talk about the, where did I lost it. Yeah, evolution. So I would urge you that if you have 10 papers in your reading list, and if you're going through my steps, let's say these steps, right? And these steps, for each one of those 10 papers, try to read the first paper to be the paper that is the oldest in that list. So go by the year of publication, not in terms of the descending order, but in terms of the ascending order, which means that you pick up that paper which is the oldest, and then finish up with the paper which is the newest. Don't go backwards. Then what happens is, what you will be able to see is how every author is trying to upgrade or come up with an upgradation of both the problem formulation as well as the assumptions. And you can actually clearly see the timeline, sort of like a Facebook timeline. You can actually see the history of evolution of how the assumptions are getting revised and how the problem formulations are getting revised. That also gives you an idea how the community is maturing around that particular research problem. That also helps you to take it to the next level. Like how things are maturing, how things are evolving when it comes to only and only formulating the problem, and when it comes to only and only formulating the assumptions. And not just the problem formulation, but also how new problem derivations are coming up, as you move from one paper to the other. What are the little differences in the problem formulation itself? Or what are the little differences in the research question itself, like how the research question has been twisted and how a new research question has come out, as you subsequently move forward. So always try to read it that way. That's a very, very nice and, interesting practice. And it helps you to remember also, how things, the history of evolution is very important when it comes to research, right? That also gives you a very detailed insight on that particular problem. Okay. Again, do not finish the paper. I know it's a very weird advice, but try following this. Don't finish the paper, go to the next paper, do the same thing, and repeat the loop. And then finally, summarize your opportunity gaps in terms of the problem formulation.